All right, I want to talk to you about equivalent fractions. But before we get too deep into the fractions, let's talk about some basic ideas, and that is multiplying a number by 1. For instance, if I take 5 and multiply it by 1, then I have 5. Now the point is, if I multiply anything times 1, I have that same number left over. I haven't changed anything. What about dividing by 1? Now, if I take any number, let's say 6, and divide it by 1, then the same rule applies, and that is I have the same number left over. So multiplying by 1 and dividing by 1 are just too simple. Now we're going to talk about equivalent fractions, meaning when I multiply the number 1/2 by 1, I'm still going to have 1/2 when I get done. But the question is, what does 1 look like? Well, 1 can look like lots of different things. What if we said 1 equals 2 divided by 2? 2 divided by 2 is 1. So when I multiply 1/2 times 1, I'm still going to have 1/2. But when we multiply fractions, we multiply straight across. So I'm going to multiply 1, that top number, the numerator, times that 2 right there. And 1 times 2 is 2. Divided by, well, I got to multiply the bottom number by 2 also. And 2 times 2 is 4. So 2/4 is equivalent to 1/2. It has the same exact value. Now, what if my 1 looks like something different? Let's say 1 looks like 3 divided by 3. Well, 3 divided by 3 is 1. Okay, so if I multiply, 1 times 3 would give me 3. And divided by 2 times 3 is 6. Well, just like 1 is half of 2, 3 is half of 6. So 3 divided by 6 is still equivalent to 1/2. Now I could show you, ultimately I could show you infinite many examples, but of course I don't have time to do infinite many. So let's just do a couple more and see if we get the understanding here. If my 1 looks like 5 over 5. Well, of course, 1/2 times 1 is 1/2. But if I multiply 1 times 5, I get 5 divided by 2 times 5 on the bottom is 10. And 10 is half, or 5 rather, is half of 10. Therefore, 1/2 is equivalent to 5/10. So those are equivalent fractions, and we could just go on and come up with all kinds of equivalent fractions equivalent to 1/2. Well, that's multiplying by 1. And equivalent fractions can work the other way. If I divide a number by 1, I still have that same number. So we want to find an equivalent fraction that's equivalent to 27 over 81, but it has to have the same value. So what I want to do this time is I want to divide. I want to divide 27 by the same number that I divide 81 by. And I happen to know that both of those numbers are divisible by 3. So I'm going to divide both of them by 3. 3 divided by 3 is 1. So 27 over 81 divided by 1 is still going to be equivalent to 27 over 81. Okay, and 27 divided by 3 is 9. And 81 divided by 3 is 27. Okay, and that is still equivalent to 27 over 81. So that's the same as 27 over 81, has the same value. But what if I divide by another form of 1? Let's say I know that both 27 and 81 are both divisible by 9. Okay, so if I divide the top by 9 and divide the bottom by 9, 9 over 9 is 1. So 27 divided by 9 is 3. And then we're going to divide that by 81 divided by 9 is 9. Okay? And that is, again, it's equivalent to, has the same value of, as 27 over 81. Well, let's do one more. If I divide both of these numbers by 27, top and bottom, 27 divided by 27 is 1 divided by, okay, 81 divided by 27 is 3. And lo and behold, 27 divided by 81 is exactly the same, has exactly the same value as 1/3. So all of these are equivalent fractions. Now, while we're at it, we're going to go ahead and go to this next page. And let me show you some equivalent fractions that you can find and use right on the multiplication grid that we use in the classroom. So let's just pick a fraction here. Let's say 3/6. Okay. Now that looks like a fraction right there, 3/6. And that is the same thing as 6 divided by 12. Both of those, in fact, are 1/2. But we just have all of these fractions on this multiplication grid. Okay, 3/6, 3 divided by 6 is exactly the same thing as 15/30. Hey, that's 1/2 also. How about 24/48? That's still 1/2 also. So all of those fractions are equivalent. Now I'm gonna clean this up a little bit, and I'll show you one that make a little bit more sense. We started out with a kind of an odd fraction there, 3/6. But let's look at something a little bit simpler. How about 2/5? 2/5. Now that's the simplest way to say that fraction, 2/5, but it could also be said as 4/10. 4/10 is exactly the same as 2/5. How about 10? About 10/25. That's exactly the same as 2/5. Okay, I cleaned this up a little bit, and we're going to go the other way. How many different ways can we say, name a particular fraction? So I'm going to look at, how about 8/24? 8/24. Now, if I divide both of those numbers by 4, say 8 divided by 4 would be 2, and 24 divided by 4 would be 6. Hey, that is exactly the same as 8/24. And the simplest way to say 8/24, if I divided both of them by 8, that would be 8 divided by 8 is 1, and 24 divided by 8 is 3. So the simplest way to say 8/24 is, in fact, 1/3. So there's all kinds of equivalent fractions that you can find and use that come in real handy, coming right there off of our multiplication grid that we use in the classroom. So I hope that made some sense. Equivalent fractions need to be a very simple idea for you, and it comes in real handy later on when we're dealing with fractions, trying to add fractions especially. Anyway, hope that helped.